Okay, so we've been talking about reacquiring bonds before the maturity date, and we did a problem like that. And now I want to do a problem with the convertible bonds. And when we do this problem, let's do exercise 1416, and then we'll do one with a sweetener, 17. But when we look at this problem on January 1st, 2012, when the $30 par value common stock was selling for $8 per share, a corporation issued $10 million of 10% convertible bonds due in 10 years. And the conversion option allowed the holder of each $1,000 bond to convert it into 6 shares of the corporation's $30 par value common stock. The debentures, the bonds, were issued for $11 million. And what they tell us here is that at the time of the issuance, the present value of the bond payments was $8.5 million, and the corporation believes the difference between the present value and the amount paid is attributable to the conversion feature. Well, right, kind of important information for the bondholders, but for the company issuing the convertible debt, that's irrelevant. We don't account for the conversion feature unless it's a special situation in which, right, the conversion feature could be settled in cash. So this is not that situation. And now they tell us on January 1st, 2013, the corporation's $30 par common stock was split 3-for-1. And in that case, right, the conversion feature would also be adjusted. And right, so instead of getting 6 shares, you would get 18 shares. On January 1st, 2014, when the corporation's $10 par common stock was selling for $90 per share, holders of 40% of the convertible bonds exercised their conversion options. Corporation uses the straight line method for amortizing discounted premium. Prepare the journal entry to record the original issuance of the bonds, right? So that's pretty easy. What we would do here on exercise 1416 on January 2012, right, is we received cash of $11 million, and we have a premium on bonds payable of $1 million, and we have bonds payable of $10 million. And let me just draw those two key accounts here. There's my bonds payable, 10 million. And here's my premium. And that's $1 million. And right, we can see at the issuance, we see the $11 million carrying value. And luckily, right, these bonds are going to use the straight line method. The corporation is going to use the straight line method. And the other nice thing is that these bonds are going to have annual interest. And so the big key here is that on January 1st, 2014, so remember this was January 2012, what we need to think about is now how much of this premium has been amortized in 2 years. And right, it's $1 million. The bonds are 10-year bonds. And so we're going to use the straight line method. So we would take 1 million, divide by 10, and we would amortize $100,000 per year. So we would have amortized $100,000 in 2012 and $100,000 in 2013. And so my balance in the premium account at December 31st, 2013, or January 2nd, January 1st, 2014, would have been $800,000, and I'd have carrying value of bonds of $10,800,000. Now, what would we do on January 2014 to take care of that conversion? Well, remember that only 40% of the bonds are ended up going to be converted. And so $4 million of the bonds payable are going to have to come off the books. So $4 million, and that would leave $6 million. And right, if $4 million of the bonds have to be retired, how much of the premium do you think should come off? Well, it looks like 40%, so I'm going to take 40%, $320,000 of the premium will come off, and that leaves $480,000. So let's make those debits and credits here. So we have bonds payable. $4 million. This is for the conversion. And I have premium on bonds payable. $320,000. And now I have to think about how many shares of stock would I issue. Well, let's see, there's $4 million of total of bonds, and each bond has an individual value of 1,000. So there's 4,000 bonds converted, and each bond gets converted into 18 shares, right? 18 shares. And so that's going to result in 4,000 times 18, 72,000 shares of common stock. And remember that each share has a par value of $10. And so I'm going to credit common stock. And just remember that each one of those bonds was convertible into 18,000 shares. And this is the total shares. It was 6 shares, but due to that 3-for-1 split, right, it becomes 18 shares. So common stock, $720,000. And, right, I'd have additional paid-in capital common stock for the difference, and that would have been $3.6 million. And that would take care of my conversion of those. So this is the book value method, because we're just going to take the bonds off the books at carrying value and replace it with common stock and additional paid-in capital common stock. All right. The other problem I wanted to do was exercise 17. And when I look at exercise 17, the only thing that's a little bit different about this one is that there's a sweetener. And they tell us that on July 1st, Tuttle Company had bonds outstanding with a face value of $200,000 and a book value of $194,000, so there was a discount of $6,000. The interest on these bonds was paid the previous day. When these bonds were issued, each $1,000 bond was convertible into 20 shares of $10 par common stock. To induce conversion, on June 15th, 2014, the terms were changed so that each bond was convertible into 22 shares of common stock if the conversion was made within 30 days. And they tell us all the bonds were converted on July 1st, 2014, when the market price of the common stock was $50 per share. Again, we're going to use the book value method, so it's not that important. But if we think about this, right, you know, what's on the books prior to conversion? Well, we have these bonds payable of $200,000, and right, we have the discount of $6,000. So, right, we've already done the accrued interest the day before on June 30th, 2014. So now the only thing we have to really worry about here is removing these and replacing them with equity. The tricky part is that, right, the conversion feature was increased in order to sweeten the pot for the bondholders to get them to convert. And so the change from the 20 share conversion feature to the 22 share conversion feature, that difference is going to be a sweetener. And so how much is that? Well, the bond payable, that comes off the books. And right, that's 200,000. And we have the discount on bonds payable, and that's 6,000. And right, we want to think about what that bond conversion expense is. And to get that bond conversion expense, right, we know that there's $200,000 in total of bonds, and each bond has a $1,000 face value. So that means that there were 200 bonds, and each bond was given 2 additional shares of common stock in order to convert. And so we issued 1,000 additional shares of common stock. Oops, 1,000. I jumped ahead in one line here. 200 times 2 is 400 additional shares of common stock to issue to induce conversion, and each one of those shares had a $50 market value. And so, right, we provided bondholders with additional $20,000 to convert their shares, and that would be recognized as an expense. Now, we're going to put the common stock, right, and we think about this, how much common stock am I going to issue? Well, remember there were 200 bonds, and each bond is going to be convertible into 22 shares, the 20 original plus the 2 sweeteners. And that's going to give me 4,400 shares. And each share has a par value of $10. So I'm going to credit common stock for $44,000. And additional paid in capital, common stock, is going to be the difference, $170,000. All right. So could have done this as 2 entries. That would have been fine. The thing to recognize here is that the bond conversion expense gets recognized at market value, but balance of the conversion just goes on the books at the book value of the bonds. All right. The last problem I want to take care of before I stop here is exercise 18, which is detachable stock warrants. And with these detachable stock warrants, the key here is that the only time we ever have to account for stock warrants is when they're detachable and they can be traded separately. If they're non-detachable, then we would not recognize them. They would still be just part of the bonds. So it's key that they're detachable. And they saw Conroe sold $500,000 of 13% bonds at 107. Each $1,000 bond carried 20 stock warrants, and each warrant allowed the holder to acquire 1 share of $10 par value common stock for $20 per share. Subsequent to the issuance of the securities, the bonds were quoted at 102 X rights, and the warrants were quoted at $4. So remember, when we talked about when we issued bonds with stock warrants, there were 2 ways of accounting for the stock warrants, and as long as they're detachable, we have to allocate them in one of 2 ways, either the proportional method or the incremental method. And let me go back to that slide. When the warrants are detachable, right, and issued with other securities, the accounting issue concerns allocating the selling price between the 2 securities. Because as a purchaser of these bonds, you're not only getting the debt securities, but you're also getting these stock warrants. So if the fair market value of each of these securities is known, then we use the proportional method. The amount that we allocate to the bond is the fair market value of the bond divided by the total fair market value of the bond and the warrant multiplied by the cash received. And we just do basically the opposite for the warrant. And that is how much is going to be allocated each. Under the incremental method, if you only know one fair market value, then you allocate that amount to that security and the balance goes to the other security. So in our case, right, luckily we know the market values of both. So our issue here with exercise 1418 is that, right, the cash received when we sold these bonds was $535,000. You know, $500,000 multiplied by the selling price of 107. 107. And so what we have to figure out is how much do I allocate to the 500 bonds, and how much do I allocate to the 10,000 warrants? Because remember, each bond had 20 stock warrants. And so we know that the bonds had a price without the warrants of 102, and that the warrants fair market value, the price was $4 per warrant. Right? So now we can figure out here, right, that the bonds had a market value of $510,000, right? 102 times 500 bonds, and the market value of all the warrants is 4 times 10,000 or 40,000. So, right, by buying it as a package, there was a slight discount from 550 down to 535, and now we have to think about what's our journal entry. Well, the amount that we're going to allocate to the bonds is 510,000 divided by 510 plus 40,000, right? Fair market value of both. I'm going to multiply that by how much I actually received for the package of securities. And that gives me 496,091. And I'll do the same thing with the warrants. 40,000, 510 plus 40 multiplied by 535, and that gives me 38,909, right? And together those add up to 535. So the important thing is I get cash of 535,000, right? I get common stock warrants, and those common stock warrants are 38,909. And now this is the important part, right? It seems like the bonds sold at a premium, right? Because I received 535. But when I look at it from a proportional perspective, the bonds actually sold at a discount. So bonds payable, 500,000, and discount on bonds payable. So we always have to use this to come up with the initial carrying value of those bonds. And so the initial discount is 3909. All right. So that takes care of, bonds being reacquired prior to maturity, takes care of the conversion features, and then it also takes care of bonds sold with warrants. So I'm going to stop here and then we'll move on in a little bit.